Thank you for taking the time out this morning. I know I've spoken to some of you personally over the last few days and historically. Myself, I've been here for 15 years here at Cobweb, so I recognise a few of your company names, but I would imagine also that you've been long-standing customers of Hosted Exchange, and it's been doing a great service all that time. So obviously we need to, well, I'm sure you're keen to understand what changes are happening because, like I say, it does a great service. It's providing your business and your users with email services, which is vital, certainly in this day and age as well during COVID, the importance of communication. So we need to brief all of our customers on what's changing. So I would like to introduce also David Tweedale, who's going to be introducing or going through the security elements of Office 365, because when we move from the Host Exchange platform, there are some other considerations that we need to implement to make sure that we're ahead of the game with this modern threat that probably most of you have seen in the world or experienced to date, some kind of cyber threat, or certainly read about it, or may have personally experienced some in the unfortunate cases. So we're looking at around about an hour, maybe a bit less, maybe 45 minutes if we get through it, and then we'll also have Q&A at the end for any questions. But so the agenda will be myself probably for about 10 to 15 minutes, I gather, and then moving on to David's section, who will cover the Mimecast piece, and then we'll wrap up with any questions, and then and that'll be the end of the session. We are recording it, so if you do want to distribute it amongst your fellow staff afterwards, then feel free to. My colleague Chloe will send that through after this webinar. So if we move on to the next slide, and who has the magic clicker? There you go, like magic, it's happened. So we're, sorry, David, I didn't get a chance to say hello there. If you wanted to say a quick hello.
Hi there, guys. As Ollie says, my name is David. I'm a partner manager at Mimecast, so I look after the long-standing relationship between Mimecast and Cobweb, and I'm thrilled to be here. So thanks, Ollie, for the introduction.
No problem. So without further ado, as we know, 2020 has been interesting, and it's been challenging on all businesses, and it's been it's impacted the Cobweb way of life. And like I say, I've been here for 15 years, and historically my role was typically to provide hosted exchange services as well as other things like SharePoint and Link and all sorts of other stuff. But predominantly the core product that Cobweb's always provided is hosted exchange, which you guys are probably more familiar with, and that has been providing email services. But as the COVID pandemic has come into play, a lot of customers, and prior to COVID, have been actively migrating to Office 365 for all the benefits of remote working. When COVID kicked in March, we saw a dramatic impact on the transition to Office 365, which we supply, and we're migrating customers onto 365 for the benefits of remote working. So Teams is a key part. So you might have been using Zoom, for example, for family and friends at the start to keep in contact with people. The Microsoft version is Teams, so that's all included in Office 365. But it was also making phone calls. We just need to get a mute there from someone. That's great, thank you. But in the transition to remote working, there was issues around just the simple stuff like making phone calls, because people didn't have their office phones, or they didn't have the ability to set up forwarding to home phones. People were VPN into the office to access data that's on file servers. People had to leave PCs on at night to get those active VPNs. So all sorts of headaches and things that were unprepared for pre-COVID, and obviously when we were sent home, we had to prepare, and there was and adjust to those unforeseen events. So as the months went on, it came quite clear that people needed to have a fluent or fluid way of accessing documents, a way of making calls, instant messaging, still creating those calendar appointments and all the important stuff that we need to do as sort of office workers, or people using these kind of softwares. But it all kind of stems from the email function. You need to have the email capability for Office 365 to tie into it. So for calendaring, phone calls, instant messaging, your presence awareness. I'll come to that in probably another call about your status of where you are, and it all stems from the email platform. So without email in Office 365, it's difficult to get it all functioning 100%. So with all of this, and management at Cobweb made the decision that we will be moving to Office 365 and closing down the hosted Exchange environment that you've been actively using for many, many years. So moving on, we are in remote working, and it seems, certainly from what I've seen on the news, that we've got at least 6 months of remote working. So we need to move yourselves and a lot of other customers onto Office 365, because remote working is here to stay. And as you can see on the stats on the screen there, a high percentage of customers and users are still being very productive whilst working at home. And a lot of the workforce will continue to work from home going forward into 2021. So you may be concerned about how this will affect you and your users, because anything technical, if you're not technically minded or you have a small IT team, you may be concerned about the changes that you're going to go through to move to Office 365. Some assurances that it is early next year, so it's not like you have to, it's all pandemonium is going to ensue anytime soon. We do have time to prepare, and we will be preparing with you. We will be going through a scoping exercise and some professional consultations with you as a business. So rest assured, we will be doing each customer case by case, because they are all different, and we will match your costs and services accordingly, here or there, because we need to understand fully what you're going to get out of Office 365. There's all sorts of things to it. It's not simply a case of how much is it, I'll have 5 of those please, or have 10 of those. There is a lot of other things to consider, and we need to understand that to make sure that we give you the right product. So like I say, your account manager, whether it's myself or the various other members in the team, they will be in contact with you to book in these sessions with you. So we ideally want to do them sooner rather than later, to get an understanding, and then we can obviously give you costs accordingly. So moving on, the benefits also of moving to Office 365, above and beyond what you get with Cobweb at the moment, you typically, customers only have the one product, or 2 services, should I say. You get the hosted email services and our support, which is known in the industry. Well, it's in the cloud industry forums, where we have some of the best support team awards. So hopefully you've had the experience of our support team over the years and had good experiences there. But moving to Office 365, you get all this other cool stuff. So you get all the latest updates for Office. It's at a lower cost typically. There's far greater security elements that we add on, and it comes on to the Mimecast service, which is almost as default to move to Office 365. Mimecast is included in that, because of the security threats that we experience. Customers that don't have external security gateway products like Mimecast have had experiences and loss of financial impact, as well as brand damage. So there's all sorts of elements that you have to consider when moving to 365. Not to terrify anyone, but we add on Mimecast as default. So if you do want that removed, then it will be upon request, just for any, just because you can obviously do that, but that is your prerogative to do so. But as default, we would certainly recommend it, and it is included in the migration to Office 365. So moving on again, and I touched on Teams at the start, but this is one of the key drivers for the migration to get people remote working and all of the benefits of it. It's not just a conference call facility. It's not just an instant messaging facility. It does enable you to create workplaces and cool areas for you to share documents together. It enables you to store your documents in one location, and you can all work on them collaboratively. I can never say that word. Collaboratively, all at the same time, and not having to email documents back and forth with the wrong versions, and you know, all this sort of headache that, you know, we experience in our careers. So Teams is great at doing all of this added value stuff that you get with Office 365, but it does all connect to email in one way or another. So that's why we have to move to Office 365. It's the right thing to do, and we need to get there as quickly as possible before April next year. So like I say, we need to have those discussions with you and get prepared for those calls before April. I think that was my slides for me on Office 365. And I just want to pass you over to David now, who will run through the security bits on email and how we best protect you and your businesses and your brands. But at the end of that, we'll have some Q&A as well if you've got any questions. Thank you.
Amazing. Thanks very much, Ollie, and hi to the audience again. I'm going to go through a few things on today's call, and you know, really, it's just to make sure that the audience understands the story of the way that the way that we do IT is changing, particularly the way that we use email is changing. And I think it's really important to think about how historically we've kept our email environment safe as we move through different evolutions of IT, and how we now need to keep some of that same logic at the front of our minds as we make this move into the cloud. And we need to recognize actually the way that we do business is changing, particularly in an IT sense. Even before COVID, we've seen this transition away from a traditional on-premises infrastructure into the cloud. So, you know, in a traditional on-prem setup or in a hosted exchange setup, you've got a physical infrastructure that you can see and touch. There's boxes with flashing lights that you can touch, screwdrivers that you can turn, and there's more and more kit that you can add to help keep the business flowing. So historically, as threats have evolved and as the landscape's changed, you know, there's been a person that's actually implementing more kit on site somewhere, whether that's you as the customer or indeed Cobweb as a hosted exchange provider, to help keep that business safe. And in many ways, that traditional on-premise way of working is quite safe. It's very easy to secure. It's all there in front of us, and we've got this really easy to define network boundary. But we're moving away from that, and we're moving into a world of SaaS applications. You know, services that are being accessed from the cloud, not from the back of the server room or indeed from a hosted exchange environment. So we've now got users that are accessing multiple systems on multiple devices, whether that's corporate devices, personal devices, mobile phones, tablets, laptops, and so on. So we've no longer got that easy to define network boundary because we're leaving that behind. And this is actually a really, really important fact. You know, the reason that this post-infrastructure era, this cloud-first era, is important is because it's transforming the way that organizations of all different shapes and sizes can leverage IT. You no longer have to be a big enterprise now to get enterprise-grade software that transforms your business. But the fact that we're leaving that old, easy to secure network boundary behind and moving into a world that's actually a little bit more dangerous in many ways is a really important context as we understand this journey from hosted exchange into Office 365. And it's very much the case that email is at the heart of that journey. It's an essential component for all businesses. It's, for most people, our primary communications platform, you know, the main way that we talk not only with our customers and our partners, but even the colleagues that we used to sit across the desk from. for many of us, it's even become a kind of storage hub or a filing system. And it's literally a way that we organize what we've done in the past, and for many people, again, what we do in the future. Microsoft Outlook powered by Exchange has been the de facto email choice for most organizations. So as we accept that we're a part of this evolution of IT and that we need to move to the cloud to modernize our workforce and optimize business processes, we need to think very, very carefully about how we plan this migration away from traditional Exchange environments and into the Microsoft cloud. The really important thing for us to remember is that email is mission critical. And I think the best way of framing that is to think about how we've traditionally kept it safe and make sure that as we make this move into the cloud from hosted Exchange, we carry that logic over. And that's what Cobweb have created with their migration plan for their customers and overlapping services like Mimecast in that transition from Hex into Office 365. So I'm going to talk a lot about on-premises mail environments, but I'll frame that in the context of hosted Exchange because the reality is they're kind of the same thing. A hosted Exchange or any sort of traditional hosted service provider is really just a customer's on-premise infrastructure, but blown up on a really, really big scale. So let's think about the ways that actually we used to keep our email safe. And in the early days, when mail started to explode in terms of the way that we were using it, the first thing that an organization had to do was try and find a way to manage this massively increasing mail flow, because it literally was an explosion. Email started off as just a really simple SMS platform, and it was probably used to send messages like, "I've just sent you a fax, can you go check, please?" But very quickly, it transitioned into actually being our primary communications platform, the main way that we would do most of our communications. Even for people like Ollie and myself that are probably supposed to be on the phone more than we're sending emails. According to Radicati, 225 billion emails were sent and received every day last year, and that's going to continue to explode to nearly 350 billion by 2022. So the first responsibility of IT teams, as well as hosted providers like Cobweb, was really quite simple, but it's very important. It's how do I make this Exchange infrastructure, or this one Exchange box that's sitting in the office somewhere, how do I make it resilient so it can actually cope with this massive amount of mail flow and this explosion of pressure that this Exchange service is now under? And the answer was really simple. It was to cluster that Exchange environment. So don't just have one Exchange server per customer, but actually have lots of them. And again, if it was an individual customer managing their own infrastructure, they'd run 2 or 3 side by side, perhaps some physical, some virtualized. And for hosted providers like Cobweb, it's exactly the same. Each customer had access to a cluster of different Exchange servers with their email traffic balanced across the 3, 4, or however many that they had. So we solved our first problem. We realized that we need resilience, and we did that with a clustered Exchange server. But as more and more emails continue to be sent and received on a daily basis, organizations found themselves with another new problem, which is what on earth do we do with all of this new data? Particularly because at this point, it wasn't just messages about picking up a fax, but more and more of our important corporate communications were being delivered by our mail servers. So more of the important stuff that we talk about as a business is passing through Exchange in some way, shape, or form. So just deleting the data wasn't a suitable answer for many organizations. So what organizations started to do is use that Exchange environment, those 2 or 3 Exchange servers running side by side, and use it as a storage unit. And that just doesn't really make much sense. You continue to add more storage to it, and hope it wouldn't fall over. And the reason it doesn't make sense is because an Exchange server, again, whether it's in your office or in a hosted Exchange environment like Cobweb, it's like a post office, really. It's there to send and receive your mail. So imagine if you collected your mail in the morning, read it, and then gave it back to the post office and asked them to store it, and then your neighbors did, and then their neighbors did, and so on and so forth. Eventually, what would happen is the post office would be so overloaded with this storage requirement that they wouldn't be able to do their job anymore, which was to send things. It's just overwhelmed by the fact that it's being asked to perform a role that it's not supposed to. And this is exactly what happened for lots of customers who are storing mail in Exchange environment and host Exchange providers like Cobweb, who are putting more and more storage into their Exchange systems. So people recognized they needed a better way of doing things. And the way to do that was to take the data out of Exchange and put it in physical storage units. So that might be disks, it could be tape drives, it could be a storage area network or some sort of on-premise archiving appliance. And we'd set up these storage units and connect them to Exchange so that every night or every week, depending on what the policy was as an organization, we'd take data out of Exchange, take it away from the post office, and store it some other place where it was safe. So we recognized that we needed archiving, and we solved that problem by having a separate third-party repository for all of our data. Finally, we uncovered, in many ways, the biggest requirement of all. And it absolutely is the fundamental issue that every single organization had to solve in some way, shape, or form. And that's that we need to keep Exchange safe. Why? Because cyber criminals realize that email is the easiest gateway into an organization. We're using it all day. We're storing lots of important information in our inboxes. So it's a natural place for hackers to start. It really is the keys to the kingdom. Now, there was some security that was already built into Exchange, again, whether that was on-prem in the server room or indeed across different hosted providers, and it was called Microsoft Forefront. But typically, organizations didn't use it, and for very good reason. And that's because, just like the post office scenario earlier, we shouldn't expect Exchange, that device that was designed to send and receive mail, to try and protect itself too, particularly when you think about the pressure that it was under. Microsoft's Exchange product became the de facto mail server. So more and more customers, the vast majority of email using customers, were using this Exchange service. So it was a really attractive target for hackers. And if you think about the way that we protect ourselves in our day-to-day lives, when we buy a house, we don't necessarily expect the person that sold a house to give us an alarm system to and inherit that. We typically should go to a third party who's really specialized in keeping that house safe. So what IT teams and hosted providers did was go to market to deploy a dedicated security service that would sit on top of Exchange and filter out anything that was unwanted or malicious. So if you think about Mailflow now, it comes into a security appliance, we get rid of any rubbish that we don't need, that good mail goes down to Exchange, and then we archive it off at the end of the night. So we recognize that we need security, and now we've built a really, really strong email management solution with services wrapped around that first Exchange server to keep it resilient, to archive our data, and to keep our users and our data safe by securing that too. And a lot of the language in the diagrams that we've been referring to refer to an on-premise environment that a customer would set up and manage themselves. But as I said earlier, a host Exchange environment is just a really blown up version of that. So what Cobweb and many other providers put together with their hosted offerings was the same kind of sophisticated email management setup, but for lots of customers all at once. So they'd all follow the same format. They have multiple instances of Exchange, which were secured by a security layer that would sit on top of it, and it would have some sort of storage component to take that data out of the post office and put it away in a safe place. So email risk management in whatever flavor it came was exactly the same. Multiple instances of Exchange, third-party data management, and dedicated email filtering services. And at Mimecast, we call this strategy for protecting ourselves in these three areas, in the red, amber, green, cyber resilience for email, which is a really, really important thing that all organizations, however they were using IT, would have to consider. And then Office 365 came along, or specifically now Microsoft 365 came along, and they introduced what was called the single cloud consolidation story to their customers. And this multi-layer thinking was soon put into question because of it. The clear message from Microsoft is that we've got a huge suite of productivity tools with services like the Office suite that we all know and love, chat, storage, identity, analytics, collaboration tools, and an awful lot more. And they use this consolidation of multiple cloud services. And as Polly mentioned earlier, as you go through this journey, the Cobweb team will scope out exactly which of these services suit you as a customer. But they put these together and presented them as, you're almost a one-stop shop for your cloud journey. So part of the message from Microsoft is consolidation. They can offer so much within a single suite of cloud services that you don't actually need to rely on the third-party technologies that you may have done in the past. And this is an absolutely transformational offering for businesses. It doesn't matter if you're 1 user or 100,000 users, there's a suite of services backed by Microsoft, who are of course the biggest software provider in the world, to help you transform the way that your business uses IT. What this means, though, from an email sense, is that a single cloud migration or a naked migration to the Microsoft cloud for Exchange becomes very attractive, And that actually has implications for how we manage our email environment. Think about those three key things that we spoke about so far. So what does Office 365 look like for email? Well, Exchange Online is the kind of center of mass for Microsoft's Office 365 and Microsoft 365 stack. It remains Microsoft's most popular service, despite the growth of Google Mail as the challenger, and also the challenge of non-email based communication systems like Slack and Zoom, and of course, Microsoft Teams. And what Microsoft did to make Exchange Online, almost their flagship product, even more attractive than the on-premises version, or the version that customers would be consuming via their hosted Exchange provider, Microsoft built in lots of additional functionality to reassure customers that a single cloud approach is absolutely sufficient for their needs. So for example, you get a 99.9% uptime SLA, which solves that resilience problem that we spoke about earlier. Microsoft can definitely cope with the mail stress. And of course, it's Microsoft. We trust them to manage their own infrastructure much better than we could do ourselves or a hosted provider might be able to do, right? We also get up to 100 gigabyte mailbox, depending on what license you procure for 365, and the option of litigation hold. So if we're concerned about that explosion of data and managing our mailboxes, then Microsoft can cover that issue too, and also remove the risk of accidental deletion of data. And then finally, Microsoft quite rightly talk about the strides they've taken in security. Exchange Online Protection and Advanced Threat Protection, which are the two different security services you can take from Microsoft, are much more comprehensive and successful security services than Forefront was in the traditional hosted Exchange on-premise days. So the big question to lots of customers was, if I've got all of this functionality, why wouldn't I opt for a single cloud? Why wouldn't I consolidate the services that historically myself or my hosted provider have wrapped into Exchange in order to just simplify the way that we do IT? And the reason why is because the threat landscape is scary. And actually, it's becoming scarier than ever. The post-infrastructure era has put even more ammunition in cyber criminals' arsenal, and the security of our businesses and its data is now a step further away from me. It's not as close to me physically. I can't touch those lights and turn those screwdrivers in the way that I used to. And what that means is we have to very, very carefully manage a triple threat of risks to our business. The first is human error. In particular, when we think about deletion of data, what would I do if I accidentally lost something that's important to me, like my email data? Secondly, is technical failure. What would be the consequences of lost productivity if there was downtime? Say, for example, if Office 365 suffered an outage, or a user broke something and we weren't able to access our email. And finally, how do we manage the increasing risk of a breach at the hands of malicious actors who will quite rightly look to exploit the even less secure cloud world and these even less secure cloud email services? Now, the best way to think about managing these risks is to go back to the past and think about what we did before and take that logic in our journey to the cloud. And as I said, this is exactly what you guys should do as customers, and this is exactly what providers like Cobweb have thought carefully about as they've crafted their proposition for a cloud-first journey for their customers. So let's think about the issues and break down how we used to deal with them in the past, because I really do think that's a useful way of thinking about it. And the first risk is, well, how do we manage the risk of technical failure, right? What if something goes wrong? Because the simple fact of technology is that it doesn't matter if you're Joe Blogs Limited, Cobweb, Apple, Microsoft, Mimecast, whoever. Anything with a moving part might stop spinning, and we have to be able to mitigate that risk. Now, to deal with that risk in an on-premise world and in a hosted Exchange setup, there was a very simple, very effective, but quite expensive approach, which is that you replicate all of your essential services across two sites. So for example, you take that clustered Exchange environment that's sitting in the office or the Cobweb data center in Fairham, and you replicate that across to a second site. You have everything running in high availability. Now, this might just be really, really simple. You just do it for key services like Exchange, but actually for lots of organizations, they do this for an awful lot more. A colleague of mine used to work at Amazon, and they once changed office while he was working there, and they wanted to move to a bigger location. And what they did was actually amazing. They kept the lease on the old office, kept the desks, left the networking in, left all the end user compute stuff like laptops and thin clients. They left most of the infrastructure that they could behind for a good few months, just in case anything went wrong when they moved across to a new location. So again, I try and use a real life example because it's simple risk mitigation. Now, this multi-site approach gives us two things which are really, really important, which is why everybody did it. Number one is redundancy. We've got another service, so if anything breaks on one site, we can fail over if that primary service breaks and go over to the secondary service. So just like switching back to the old office if the new one has a wobble. Most importantly, though, it gave organizations control. It allowed IT teams to be in control of their business continuity. So everybody in the IT team or everybody in the hosted exchange engineering team at Cobweb would know exactly what they have to do to bring the service back to life. The people that are running IT are in control of business continuity. So if we move to Microsoft 365 alone and we take that single cloud approach, do we do away with this strategy? Do we really have the same level of business continuity? Because whilst it's certainly true that uptime is exceptional in Office 365, better than many organizations could achieve for themselves, as well as, of course, many hosted providers could do, because of the extensive infrastructure that Microsoft can provide. If we jump in with both feet, where is that service redundancy? Now, that isn't to say that Microsoft isn't redundant, because of course it is. They wouldn't have created the platform they had if it wasn't a redundant service. But that is to say, where is the secondary service that we fail over to if the primary service, Exchange Online, goes down? There isn't a Microsoft 365B, and very few organizations keep that on-premises infrastructure to fall back on. So we've lost that level of redundancy that we were used to. And much more significantly for a trusted provider like Cobweb is, where is that control? In an on-premise world, if something goes wrong, everybody in their team would know what to do to get the services back up and running. It might take a day, it might take an hour, it might take a few seconds, but we're in control of our own destiny. So we can target our teams, we can set targets as an organization, we can really manage business continuity. But if we come into the office in the new world and Exchange Online is down, and as a customer, that's the only place in which my email is running, then we have to call Microsoft, we check Twitter, and we have to wait for the vendor to fix the issue. We should not expect Microsoft to have this burden on themselves. They can't provide a resilient service to their already very redundant service. So we have to think about multiple vendors that give us that business continuity strategy. Ultimately, we need that resilience. What about human error? How do we protect ourselves in the past from this problem of accidental deletion of data? Because I think that's probably the worst case scenario if you think about what would happen if a user made a mistake. Well, again, none of us are immune to this. A single error in a line of PowerShell could delete an Exchange database. A user opening the wrong attachment could corrupt their inbox completely. And we've always known this, and we've always planned for this as well. So as well as on-premise archiving, those disks, tapes, and SANs that we kept close to our Exchange server to take our data off and manage our mailboxes, almost all organizations had an off-site backup. They had a second location where a copy of all of that data was kept just in case they needed it again in the future. It's simple risk mitigation. I can even remember my dad, when I was growing up, he'd keep our holiday photos on his laptop, but then he'd back up all of those photos to a hard drive and stick it in the loft. Maybe a little bit of paranoia from him, or maybe it's just simple risk mitigation. If it's important, keep it twice. So that's exactly what lots of customers and hosted providers did to keep their customers' data safe. They kept multiple instances of that information. So what does that look like in a single cloud world? Well, your options when you move to Exchange Online are to have a huge amount of mailbox storage and the ability to restrict a user or an admin's ability to delete data. And this is absolutely fantastic. They're solving lots of the problems just by giving you much more control and much more space in your mailbox. Suddenly, the post office falling over isn't a realistic opportunity if I can have up to 100 gigabyte mailbox. But we're still left with the same quandary. If our data integrity is really, really important to us, in particular for compliance or just to keep our business as usual, then Microsoft is now the sole custodian of our data, and 80% of our IP is in email. So all of the data that's most important to an organization is only being held in that single repository within the Microsoft Cloud. So say, for example, I did need to remove some data. Perhaps a user's asked for the right to be forgotten. I then have to lift the legal hold off, manually export that data, and during that period, I could accidentally delete the data that I don't mean to, and once it's gone forever. So the question that we need to ask ourselves is, Microsoft has become a fantastic on-premise archive as well as our live mailbox, But how do we make that even better for you as a customer by making sure we've still got that offsite backup that we used to? And we do that by making sure that we have archiving. Finally, and most importantly, so I guess it's saving the best till last, what of malicious intent? We know that 94% of security breaches in the IT world start off with an email. It's the primary vehicle for hackers to compromise a business. And the techniques that they're using are changing constantly. So I've been at Mimecast now for 6 years. I spent the first 2 years talking about spam management and viruses. I spent the subsequent 4 years talking about things like phishing, ransomware, man-in-the-middle attacks, impersonation threats, supply chain attacks. I'm now talking about even more sophisticated techniques that organizations use to mask phishing, things like homoglyphs and punicode, which are letters from different alphabets to create fake domains that look really, really compelling. So the fact of the matter is, the landscape is changing rapidly. The attacks are becoming more and more intelligent. Target, the big US retailer, were breached a couple of years ago, and they didn't even make a mistake themselves. A ventilation company that was on site fixing air conditioning units in Target clicked on a phishing link whilst on their internet network, and it cost Target nearly $150 million to repair that damage. So it's getting really, really challenging to actually manage the kinds of risks that our email accounts are seeing. And in an on-premise world, we had a strategy to mitigate this, again, as did hosted providers like Cobweb. They layered up. They put lots of different security solutions on top of Exchange, not just the one that was built into that Exchange container. And again, we do this at home. So most of us might have a gate at the bottom of the garden, a lock on the front door, an alarm system, perhaps an angry bulldog, Ollie's is called Rocky, or a wife with a baseball bat. We've got lots of different obstacles that the threat actors are going to have to overcome if they are to compromise what's important to us, which is our home, our families, or in an IT world, our users and our data. So that layered approach to security is an absolutely intrinsic part of keeping ourselves safe, and actually is more important than ever when you think about the growing threats that the cloud has actually provided, the growing opportunities, I should say, that the cloud has now offered to cyber criminals. So it's absolutely necessary to continue this defense in depth in a cloud world. And in fact, in many ways, it's more important than ever, because when we move to Office 365, or Microsoft 365 rather, this issue becomes really big because we're moving to the biggest Exchange database in the world. It's not just my data now, it's millions and millions of users' data all in one place and all protected by a single pane of glass. So if I'm exclusively relying on Exchange Online protection, then me and something like 220 million other users are all protected by that single lock. And there's nothing else on top of our data and our users. So it's absolutely crucial that we think about this logically. In an on-premise world and in a hosted Exchange environment, when the attack surface is relatively small, we recognize that we needed a third-party security service. Cobweb, for example, uses a service called Message Labs, which is powered by Symantec, which sits on top of all of their customers to provide that additional layer of security, despite the fact that it's a relatively small attack surface. So if we move to Exchange Online, this absolutely enormous attack surface, we need to absolutely make sure that we continue to do the same things and put that additional layer of security on top of Exchange Online within Microsoft 365. We must have security. So we have resilience and continuity, we have archiving, and we have security. And these 3 or 4 things are absolutely imperative to us running a safe email environment that protects our users, our data, and ultimately the health, wealth, and reputation of our organization. The challenge, though, is that the years of building up this extensive email management solutions on-prem with all of these different layers and all these different third-party vendors that we wrap around Exchange is really quite expensive. So if you look at the diagram on the left-hand side, if you magnify that by many thousands of customers, that's the complication that you'd see in a hosted Exchange environment. So we're making this sacrifice of complexity because the benefit that we get is risk management. So our risk profile goes down, but because of all this hardware and software and the salaries that we have to pay to manage this infrastructure, our cost goes up. If we take the alternative approach and we just jump in with both feet and move to Office 365 in a single or a naked cloud migration, it's the other end of the scale. We've introduced lots of risk to our business because we haven't got the same redundancy and control that we used to. We've only got a single repository of our customer data, and we've only got that single layer of protection. But we do so because the benefits are consolidation. We can keep those costs down, we can simplify IT, and it really does make sense for our business to do that. Now, we absolutely need to find a balance of both. We have to make the move to the cloud because Microsoft 365 and the services that Microsoft are bundling are absolutely transformative to our business. As I've said a number of times, they'll completely change the way that organizations of all different shapes and sizes are able to leverage technology. But we've got to do so in a way that's safe and that's responsible. So we've got to try and find a best of both worlds approach. And the way that we do that is by recognizing that two clouds are better than one. And this is the strategic decision that 40,000 customers across the globe, as well as established managed service providers like Cobweb, have made to keep their customers safe. It's by overlapping Mimecast on top of that investment in Office 365. We can strike that balance between risk mitigation by putting those multiple layers in place from a dedicated third-party service that wakes up living and breathing email security, continuity, and email archiving, whilst also leveraging the benefits of the cloud and keeping our costs down to a reasonable level, releasing ourselves from all that complicated infrastructure and actually enjoying the huge suite of services that Microsoft can provide from that single pane of glass. But most importantly, this means that we've got a secure, always-on email environment with a safe place to store your email data. And as I said, this is why Mimecast has become an integral part of Cobweb's strategy to support their customers as they move to Office 365. Simply stated, we complement the already vast array of services that you get from Microsoft by making sure that they're secure, always available, and that have that plan B for your data on the email side. And at Mimecast, we call this strategy cyber resilience. It's about overlapping the essential services in security, continuity, and archiving to make sure you're safe as you make that migration to the cloud. Now, as standard, Cobweb include Mimecast security functionality on all Microsoft 365 engagements. So as Ollie mentioned earlier, Microsoft is included as standard as part of your migration plan, and that will make sure that we're providing that layer on top of Office 365 that makes sure that we're keeping your business safe. At Mimecast, we call that strategy email security 3.0, and what that is a pervasive email security strategy. So rather than you as a customer having to buy lots of different security tools and stick them all together, we've built a portfolio of different security services which overlap and sit on top of Office 365 to keep you really, really safe at the perimeter from external threats, but also inside your network and beyond. The second stage is resilience and recovery. We can provide a business continuity service that ensures that you have 100% access to email. So even on those rare occasions, and it is really, really rare that Exchange Online suffers from downtime, you've got that additional layer that allows you to keep your business flowing. You click a button, you flick a switch, and you continue to send and receive emails to and from Mimecast while Microsoft sort the issues at an Exchange level. It doesn't matter how rare this is, and thankfully it's a very, very rare occasion. You absolutely need that insurance to make sure that you're in charge of your business continuity and there's not a responsibility of a vendor. And then the final layer is compliance and data protection. A Mimecast customer has the benefit of an immutable, tamper-proof email archive, and that really, really important second repository of your data, as well as, of course, giving you the ability to search, export, and scrutinize that data for e-discovery purposes. So if you are interested in looking at the second and third layer, that amber and green continuity and archiving service, then please do drop a note over to your Cobweb account manager because we will explore that as part of your M365 scoping. As standard, you get the security piece, which is certainly the most important, but we're more than happy to talk about the amber and the green that can really complement that move to 365 and give you that cyber resilience posture rather than just cyber security. So I'm going to pass over to Ollie now, who's just going to briefly talk about the benefits of a managed migration, and then we'll come to a close with any Q&A.
Hello again. So thank you for that, David. I know there's a lot of information there, and probably some information was absorbed and maybe not, but we can obviously recover any of those points that David mentioned there. Certainly archiving is great. For the a working example for me is, you know, if I like to keep my mailbox quite lean, for example, I only have a few gig mailbox. So if at Christmas time, at the end of the year, when it's typically a quiet time, I might go in and delete a load of stuff to get my mailbox nice and lean. But then if ever I need to return to an email that has been deleted, that has been removed from the Exchange environment, as default, if you don't have any archiving capability, it is lost forever. So it can be fantastic to have that archive capability to then recover those emails. I'm sure maybe some of you have had that experience in the past. So it's worth noting that, you know, if you do delete stuff from your deleted items within Office 365, and this does go for the hosted Exchange platform as well, after a period of time, 90 days, it is gone forever. So regardless of how much money you'd want to throw at it. So that's just one other element of the archiving, just to recap on that. And continuity as well is a feature that I've also benefited from. So in the rare example that Exchange does go down, Mimecast has the technology to continue to enable users to send and receive mail. So another great example for that. But you might be a business that can handle an hour a day of maybe not a day, but certainly a few hours here or there may not be the end of the world every so many months. So we can cover all of this on the scope call. So a managed migration, what does that consist of? How complicated is it? What sort of stress levels is that going to cause you, and how much time do you need to allocate to this? The answer is very minimal. So the actual migration itself from hosted Exchange, the Cobweb platform, or Hex, all sorts of terminology just to complicate things further, but where your email is at the moment, there used to be a fairly complex, time intrusive experience to migrate from one provider to the other, because you have to bear in mind that your data is in our London data center and Fareham, so multiple data centers, and that's where all your data is sitting at right now. We need to gather all of that. So if you're a 10 user business or 100 or larger, we have to encapsulate all of that data and move it over the internet into Office 365. So immediately you might be scratching your head saying, how do I do that? Well, you don't is the answer. So as part of this managed migration, the Cobweb engineers, because we have access to that environment, that Exchange environment, we will manage all of that for you. So that's part of the service that you would invest in and pay for to get that done. So you don't have to do any of that work. We will do it in a phased method depending on your size. Like I say, we scope this out further, but there's a couple of options on how we move. We might just do all users in one go. If you're just 20 to 50 users, we might just do it all in one day. If you're larger, we may phase it over a department a day. Might do customer services on Monday, finance on Tuesday, and so on throughout the week until you're complete. For the more technically minded people out there who might be thinking, well, how is the Outlook profile managed? Because when you move to a new provider, you do need to recreate the Outlook profile. So there was always a bit of legwork for the IT administrators or the individuals to recreate their Outlook profile. So as part of this migration, we have a new tool that's bespoke to us. So you can't get this functionality from other providers. If you went to other providers or direct to Microsoft or to an other provider, you would need to recreate the Outlook profile. That is a challenge if you're not all in one location, and we're not all in one location anymore because we're all working from home. So this tool is fantastic at recreating the Outlook profile, which streamlines that migration even more slicker. So historically, when moving on to a hosted Exchange, which you would have done if you were in your job, in your business at the moment, if you went through that experience several years ago, you may have experienced not necessarily a painful experience, because hopefully the migration onto Cobweb was smooth, but you would remember that there was a fair amount of legwork, or I prefer to say donkey work, because there is a bit of rinse and repeat. You have to do lots of things monotonously over and over again to complete a migration. All of that headache is now being removed. So Cobweb will do about 95% of the work for you. There is some elements that we still can't do on your behalf. So things like mobile device management, we can't reconfigure your mobile devices because they're in your hand, and we don't have access to those. There are other options around mobile device management that we can talk later about, bring your own devices and corporate data on devices, but that is a discussion for later. But the actual reconfiguring of devices for your individuals, it's a 2-minute job, so it's not too challenging. And the other element that we will assist you with is MX record changes. To those who don't know what MX records are, you don't really need to know the ins and outs of it right now, but we will help you with it. So they're the 2 bits that we can't really help with, but all of the other complexity, headache, burden, time restraints, and all of that is pretty much gone. So just to wrap up, so I'm conscious we're nearly at the hour. To start the process, to get an understanding of cost, to get an understanding of what services you're going to have with Office 365, we need to book in that call. So we get our, pardon me, we need to get your account managers engaged with you. So we will be calling out over the next couple of weeks or next few days. Try and book in that call. We'll have that chat, probably give yourself half an hour to 45 minutes for that call. And then at the back of that call, we can give you a proposal or some costs to say it's going to cost this much to move. These are the time frames, and get you onto Office 365 with all the security benefits from Mimecast. I would implore you to consider doing this sooner rather than later. I know we're all guilty in one way or another of putting things in the back burner or leaving it to the last minute, and what we do not want is to have everyone leaving it until April with further delays and further disruption to your business. Putting it bluntly, the hosted exchange data center is shutting down in April. There's no extensions, there's no possibility of an extra week or an extra 2 weeks here. We have to have this data center closed, and physical hardware is being removed from the data center, so extensions are simply not possible. So we have up and from now until then to do this. So like I say, we can do all of the work predominantly. We just need to understand exactly what licenses to put you on, which will be there or a bit there or thereabouts of what you're currently paying. So it's not going to be too scary. So on that, I will open the board to questions. We will also be emailing out, so if you want to email off any questions, feel free to. This will also be turned into a video and emailed out if you want to distribute that across to your business as well. But yeah, open the floor to any questions to myself and David.
Thanks, Ollie. It's Chloe here from the marketing team at Cobweb. We have a question in the chat from an individual named Dave, asking if a computer is lost on site, is there a way to disable all email and 365 information remotely from the computer?
Hi there, Dave. So yes is the answer. There's a number of mobile device management solutions and identity solutions that you can include in your Office 365 environment, which is another benefit that you get above and beyond hosted exchange at the moment. Hosted exchange doesn't have the ability for a sort of identity management. So if you want to remove data for a particular user or particular information on specific devices, mobile, tablets, whatever, then that can all be remotely wiped and managed, typically through Intune in Office 365. But if that is a key factor for you, then that's another bit that is scoped out in the scope calls that we have pre-migration onto Office 365. But in short, yes is the answer. Do you want to read through them, Chloe, and then I'll respond accordingly?
Yep, there's one other question from Mark that Emma, our head of Cobweb success team, has already answered, so that's fantastic.
Okay.
But if anyone else does have any questions, please feel free to write it in the chat box that you can see open. But if you have joined Teams via web browser, you might not be able to see the chat. So if you do have any questions, you can unmute your mic and ask them using your own voice. So we've got one other question just come through from an individual named Alex asking, what is the exact date that Hex will stop working?
Hi, Alex. It's Emma here, the head of Cobweb Customer Success. We haven't been given a specific date. We've been told that it will be the end of April. We need to have everyone migrated off the service. So I would assume that means the 30th of April. Hope that answers your question. Oh, sorry, yeah, I saw the thanks.
Brilliant. So we've got another one in asking about data protection policy, saying with data protection policies that stipulate knowing where all information is stored, is this known, excuse me, or available as a document?
Yeah, so there's plenty of documentation around Office 365 and data sovereignty. All data is held within the UK. There are a few exceptions to that, but very few exceptions. But email, Office, OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, all of that information is UK based, based on your own location. So there is a link, which if you want to email me, Dave, directly afterwards, there is a link that I can send you, which gives you a breakdown of where all the data where the data resides, but predominantly it's all UK based.
Brilliant, thanks, Ollie. I am conscious of time, and I don't want anyone to be late for any other meetings. We have just one more question in, but if anyone does want to leave due to it being over time, that's absolutely fine. So thank you for attending. Last question is from an individual named Adam asking, we have internal policies preventing the use of cloud services. Effectively, you will only be offering cloud services after April.
Hi, Adam. It's Emma here again. I think that's probably quite an interesting one. We'd need to work through with you to understand what those policies are. It depends how, what the reason behind that is, because hosted exchange is often seen as cloud because it's not on your own premises. It's actually hosted by someone else and someone else's service. So we'd need to understand that for you. I've got lots of customers that work in the sort of defence sector as well as finance sector. So if we could do this as a follow-up, I'll make sure that your account manager understands that you've got some critical policies around this, and then we can understand that to work out if there is a way around it for you. I hope that helps answer.
Brilliant, thank you, Emma. Cool, so with that being at the end, it's about 1 minute past 12, I'd just like to take the time to say thank you to Ollie and David for doing this webinar with us, and thank you everyone for attending. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you. Thanks everyone. Thanks for coming.
Cheers, guys. Thanks for having me.
Bye.
Bye-bye.